Welcome everyone to second Saturday session. We are excited to have Susuana Amoah, also known as the Black Gallerina, here for Curating Other Worlds. And I'm going to read her bio here. Susuana Amoah, also known as the Black Gallerina, is a London-born, Brighton-based cultural activist, curator, and interdisciplinary artist. She's currently a PhD researcher at Goldsmiths, University of London, where she's researching decolonial praxis in public contemporary art galleries. Susuana is passionate about socially engaged art, fugitive feminism, decolonial praxis, and exploring creative ways of highlighting narratives and social movements by marginalized groups. She is also the community officer at Arts Emergency and the facilitator of the Contemporary Visual Arts Network, Southeast Cultural Equity Forum. So welcome, Susuana. We're so excited to have you here today. I am going to put you on Spotlight. And you can take it away.
Amazing. So I made a slideshow presentation for today, so I'm just gonna stick that on. Hopefully it works well.
Looks good.
Can you see my screen? Okay, yeah. Great. Can everybody see my screen okay?
Well, it says loading right now.
Okay. It says my screen is paused and I should resume share, but I don't, I'll try share again.
Okay, try sharing again. There we go.
Yay, amazing. Yeah, so thank you very much for welcoming me here today. I'm really excited to share my research and my activities here with you, especially because recently I've made a lot of great strides, and this is the first time I've actually been able to share where I am. So a bit about me. My PhD research title is Curating Other Worlds, Exploring Decolonial World Building and Contemporary Art Curatorial Practice within a English context. So in my research, I argue that the majority of diversity and inclusion projects that have been run since the 60s, that have been run specifically in the art sector, contemporary art sectors and galleries, have ended up reinforcing Eurocentric aesthetics and standards rather than actually tackling systematic racism. And although these sort of exhibitions and projects that have come out of these larger umbrella programs run by the government have enabled some artists of colour to have some representation in major galleries, they still have their work sort of limited and told through the lens of the white male and privileged gaze that often misinterprets their work and also gears their work through a neurotypical lens. So I came from this from the angle of somebody that was a gallery worker, somebody that curated, but had trouble dealing with the sort of systematic whiteness of gallery spaces, and as a neurodivergent person in a neurotypical space, finding difficulties to engage with gallery spaces, which is quite sad because I love being within art spaces in general, and having a discussion with artists, audience members and curators who shared similar identities, and coming to the conclusion that the way to tackle this is through a decolonial and more imaginative approach that incorporated the radical imagination. So what is decolonial world building? So in my my dissertation, I defined decolonial world building as the development of fictional worlds that challenge modern/colonial aesthetics and narratives and social orders. So it comes with the idea, in order to like actually create these spaces, we need to reconfigure how we imagine the gallery space in terms of the design, who feel, and the sensory experience, and how that impacts who wants to engage in those spaces. So the two questions that my thesis covers is how might the process of decolonial world building be used as a means of bridging decolonial theories with practice within contemporary art curation, and how can a world building game operate as a tool, as a decolonial tool to curate more, sorry, I can't even see my screen, more exhibitions that challenge Eurocentric aesthetics. So I'll go on to the game element later on in the presentation. So as part of my thesis, it's half practical and half written. And there's an element where you have to, I guess, document your process throughout the years of your PhD. And I chose to document my process through my YouTube channel, which is called Black Gallerina, where I sort of take the arts and my practice and add sort of my thoughts and mix the two. And it's a way of me to like process my thoughts in a creative way, but also share those on in a more accessible way through YouTube. And that's sort of where I came up as the Black Gallerina. I started this around 2 to 3 years ago. So one of my most favorite famous elements is my Color With Me videos, where I go through a whole coloring process while talking about a specific topic to do with decolonial theory, racial theory, and contemporary art. So I'm just going to play one which is called Color With Me, Trauma-Born and Racial Capitalism. Hopefully you'll be able to hear it and there will be no ads.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Color With Me, where I, the Black Gallerina, talk about decolonial theory, curatorial practice, and contemporary art galleries while colouring away. For this video, I am colouring in a picture I drew inspired by the scene in the Disney animated Snow White film, where Snow White is kind of dead, but instead of burying her, the dwarves felt like it's appropriate to put her body on display indefinitely so others can enjoy her beauty. I thought that it would be relevant to the topic of discussion today, which is about how the contemporary art world capitalizes on Black trauma and the exploitation of Black artists. For tools, I will be using the Arteza Everblend skin tone marker set, some Hoo brush markers, and the Hoo marker paper pad. As always, you can find out more information about these materials in the description box of this video. With all that said, let's get colouring. The two key terms are racial capitalism and trauma porn. The term racial capitalism was first coined by the late Professor Cedric J. Robertson to describe the relationship between modern capitalism and racism. In 1983, he published a book titled Black Marxism, The Making of the Black Radical Tradition, in which he wrote that the historical development of world capitalism was influenced in the most fundamental way by the particularistic forces of racism and nationalism. Nowadays, the term racial capitalism is more commonly used to refer to the process of deriving social and economic value from the racial identity of another person, as described by Professor Nancy Leong in her 2013 article titled Racial Capitalism. The definition of trauma porn, which I will be using for the purposes of this video, is by the interdisciplinary artist Brittany J. In her article titled What Trauma Porn Is and Why It Hurts Black People, she describes trauma porn as being media that showcases a group's pain and trauma in excessive amounts for the sake of entertainment. Trauma porn is created not for the sake of the marginalised group, but instead to console and entertain the non-marginalised group. It also has the tendency to cater to the non-marginalised person's ego versus actually helping the marginalised group depict what life is actually like for them. I wanted to write about this topic because the past year has really made me reflect on how the exhibition and sharing of Black pain and death has become a standard for anti-racist work across society. Specifically how this activity is positioned as educational and awareness raising whilst disregarding the mental health and well-being of living Black people. When it comes to the art world, trauma porn has become a way for some galleries to benefit from institutional racism through their curatorial powers. While I think that the 2020 Black Lives Matter movement, along with the increasing reliance on social media, has contributed to the pervasiveness of this phenomenon, my concerns around this issue actually emerged a few years before the pandemic. When I first began my career in the art sector, I started to recognize a pattern in the ways in which many contemporary art galleries programmed Black artists. Coming from working in the higher education sector, it was easy to see the similarities between the academy and galleries when it came to looking at how these institutions decided to include Black people. When I look back to all my years in the British education system, I cannot recall many instances where I studied the culture and histories of the Black diaspora free from a white colonial gaze. A white colonial gaze which could only conceptualize Black people as Black bodies. There were a few times where I can remember seeing Black knowledge being discussed outside a race-themed week within specific modules or during the classic Black History Month program. Even then, the topics of discussions that I recall taking place were often limited to the transatlantic slave trade, racial trauma, and death, as if Black people made no other contributions to any other areas of knowledge. It didn't take me long to see that in the art world, the work of Black artists was often represented in a similar way. And the subject of Black trauma was also a theme of great interest. I think that if the focus for this kind of trauma-orientated work was aimed at producing creative spaces for healing within Black communities, this might not be such a problematic issue. However, when you consider how white-dominated many of the audiences of these galleries are, you may begin to understand how very awkward these types of exhibitions can be in reality. As I met and spoke to more and more Black artists, I became aware of the difficulties some of them are facing when it came to trying to find support to produce and exhibit work that didn't center racism and Black trauma. There are, of course, Black artists and artists of colour who sometimes choose to create art that explores racial trauma. However, what I think some galleries fail to comprehend is that these artists are capable of making other types of work and that their work can also be shown throughout the year and not just for special occasions. A really prominent example of this kind of exploitation within a US gallery would be New York's Whitney's Museum of Art and the cancelled exhibition, which was titled Collective Actions, Artist Interventions in a Time of Change. The exhibition was scheduled to open in September 2020 and was supposed to showcase work inspired by the 2020 Black Lives Matter uprising. However, it was revealed that a lot of the artwork was acquired from Black artists through BLM fundraising art sales. Therefore, the museum purchased many pieces of work at a discounted rate. The museum also failed to tell artists that their work was going to be included in the exhibit. While this particular situation happened in the US, I assure you that this type of racial capitalism also takes place in UK art institutions. For example, one of the latest submissions to my Gallery So White online exhibition is from a curator who was commissioned by a large gallery in London to produce an exhibition in response to Black Lives Matter. This was a few years ago, by the way. They wrote, I was part of curating an exhibition at a major gallery, and throughout the whole process, the team made it infinitely more difficult. Bearing in mind we had been sought out to exhibit and curate a month-long series, it took about 6 months of back and forth to even agree on an acceptable pay rate that wasn't laughable. This would at least make sense if it was a small independent gallery, but this was a huge institution with wealthy benefactors. We also found out that our white counterparts exhibiting in the same space were being offered more. Unlike the museum exhibition, this show actually went ahead. The whole program, inspired by conversations and campaigns against anti-Black racism, was made by Black people who had experienced anti-Black institutional racism whilst producing the work. One thing that I have learned so far during this research project is that galleries are really good at hiding the exploitative practices that go into some of their most progressive looking projects. There was another submission to Galleries Are White which talked about the ways in which galleries appropriate the identities of Black artists to use as evidence of their commitment to racial equity. The submission came from Black artists working in the southeast of England. They wrote, "I have found galleries in the UK to be difficult spaces to navigate, mostly in terms of my race and class. I find the work some galleries do to be appropriative or exploitative. Appropriative in the sense that once a gallery shows one or two Black artists, they then take some ownership of the artist's Blackness. Photographs, posters, the artist's face front and centre to add a bit of diversity, not too much that you alienate your white liberal audience who can only take so much guilt before they start to feel victimised. The act of showing a handful of Black artists every year means that galleries can claim to be radical and anti-racist spaces without ever doing the work. This is a good example of how the constructed hyper-visibility of this marginalised group of artists and cultural workers creates a false image of progress within these institutions. I think that the art world has reached a point that the notion that the work needs to be done is undeniable. This is clear by the numerous anti-racism statements that emerged as a result of Black Lives Matter. However, we must be aware that there are galleries that have managed to commodify the concept of doing the work. They loudly claim to champion diversity and to be inclusive of Black artists, but what they've actually done is find alternative ways to further capitalise on the marginalisation of Black people and our collective trauma. Well, that's all for this episode of Colour With Me. I hope that you found that helpful. If you want to find out more about any of the terms or topics that I've discussed today, please see the description box of this video for a list of relevant links. Hello and welcome back.
So that's one example of the Colour With Me series, where I do talk about quite difficult topics, but juxtapose that with sort of a chill background music and chilled activity. So I guess it's easier for me and other people to digest. And I use it to sort of encourage discussion in those areas with people I work with, but also don't work with. I kind of do one of those once a month, I try. Alongside, I do exhibition visits where I kind of look at the exhibition design more than the art itself and give my take on it in the context of my research questions. So this is one exhibition called Your Ship Has Landed, which was in London, in Greenwich.
Hello everyone, it's the Black Gallerina here. The date is Friday, the 26th of November 2021. And on this evening, I went to visit the Now Gallery current exhibition, Your Ship Has Landed by Lydia Chan. Now Gallery is a free public exhibition space for contemporary art, fashion, photography, and design, right next to the North Greenwich Tube Station in South London. Lydia Chan is a set designer and multidisciplinary artist who was selected for the Now Gallery's 2021 Design Commission. On the gallery's website, it says that the aim of the commission is to create space for visitors to come and perform in, interacting with a narrative that explores the bubbly, fantastical qualities of science fiction. By collaborating with digital artists, Chan was able to create a multi-layered AR and physical experience. I didn't read up about the interactive part of the exhibition, so I was pleasantly surprised by the QR codes. By scanning the codes, you could see even more art, and I discovered that visitors were also encouraged to share their experiences online via an Instagram account. I think that there have been a lot of disappointing virtual exhibitions since the beginning of the pandemic, but I think that this exhibition has really nailed it. My friend who I brought along with me also really liked the exhibition. However, he questioned if the Now Gallery was a real gallery. I asked him why he didn't think the space was a real gallery, and he said it was because none of the art was in frames. So I explained to him that a gallery doesn't need to have art in frames to be a gallery. He then said that if you take away that condition of what a gallery space is, then those spaces can be defined as galleries. I told him that I really didn't see that as a problem. If you want to live a little outside the conventional white cube exhibition space and experience a space that is dedicated to art, sci-fi and joy, this exhibition will be on until the 6th of March 2022. You can also take part in the virtual tour of the exhibition online by the Net Gallery, which is a London-based digital arts platform that turns physical exhibitions and art spaces into immersive 3D virtual experiences.
So I have been visiting loads of exhibitions around, tried to be around the country, but mostly London because that's my nearest city outside Brighton where I live. Basically exhibitions that sort of challenge the white cube, sometimes meeting the curators, sometimes not, always bringing a friend with me if I can, just to have like a novice around to see what they think about the exhibition space. Just to get a feel and out there, but also make videos about my approach and analysis of exhibition design and how some of them do and do not conform to colonial methods of exhibition making. So one of the activities I've also been doing during my study is hosting Galleries So White workshops, where I meet up with curatorial students, curators, and people in the curatorial field to discuss their curatorial education and curatorial practice, and having an open discussion about how racism and colonialism feeds into that, and what kind of sort of new curatorial practice or approach to education they wanted to see. Elements of decolonial curatorial practice. So towards the end of those workshops, I talked to people about what, if there was a concept of decolonial curatorial practice within a contemporary art sense rather than a museum sense, what would that include? And sort of headlines from that is it needed to resist Eurocentric narratives and interpretation. It needed to challenge the single curator and single narrative dynamic. It needed to resist the framework of Eurocentric aesthetics, reimagining, creating spaces beyond the white cube, and centering community and transcultural exchange, and treating artists and audience of color with care and respect. So following that, I was trying to figure out what activity or thing could I create from as an educator and curator that could encompass these things and enable curators to address and create sort of anti-racist, inclusive spaces in a way that wasn't delivering a year-long course on curatorial practice. And one of the things I started to create was sort of creative imaginary exercises for artists. So one of the exercises was called Kill the White Cube in Your Head. And it was an exercise that looked at reimagining space beyond our colonial understandings of galleries. And it was a sound piece where I gathered 4 sort of artists, curators, writers, like creatives, yeah, it was for women and non-binary people of colour. And I gave them the task of pretending that they lived in an alternative timeline where colonialism did not exist, and pretending that they had a communicator to my timeline, and they had to explain what the exhibition was like in their timeline using mostly focusing on other senses. Like they could tell me what it looks like, but I wanted to know what it smelled like, what it tastes like, what the sound was like, really indulging in other senses because that's part of decolonial aesthetic theory. And I presented it at uni in a white cube space using coloured mirrors because the effect of it is when you look into the mirror, you sort of look into an alternative coloured space, and that juxtaposed the sort of mirrored, the white space that you was in. And because it was like a pop-up exhibition, not many people outside the university actually went to got to visit it. So recently, for the purposes of this call, actually, I revamped the exhibition so more people can listen to it online. So I'm going to play you a small clip of it so you get the idea. Not all of it is like 20 minutes long, but it's a very cool listen. Where did it go? Okay, so it's called, the revamped version is called Pluriverse Radio, Tales from Other Realms.
Hello and welcome to Pluriverse Radio, with your host, me, the Black Gallerina, bringing you the latest and hottest exhibition reviews from different worlds. Here at Pluriverse Radio, we like to explore the arts and cultures of different timelines of Earth. Colonialism did not. Today, I'm happy to announce that we have 4 callers from different timelines who are eager to share their exhibition reviews. Cozy and get ready to connect. First caller of the show is Rhoda.
We're outside, and I say we and not I, because in this timeline, viewing art is not a singular experience. The sun is shining. I spent the day laboring, but not laboring for profit or wage, laboring for myself and for others, reading, sharing skills with people. There's some kind of rehearsal happening in this field where we are. And it's not really a performance because at any time, anyone can join in and improvise and add to the story. They can add their paintings or their films or their drawings. It's very much a collaborative space. There aren't really performers or artists. We're all moving together. What I can see is other people being with one another, organizing their labor in different ways. I can smell food cooking. I can smell plants and flowers. I can smell the bodies of the people around me and next to me, and those smells are familiar to me. They're comforting. As I said, what I'm viewing or what I'm experiencing and what I'm being part of is not necessarily an artwork, because the expectation of art in return for something, money, an audience, a following, has been abolished. The space feels open and porous. It feels like there's lots of possibility for what this thing that I'm viewing or this thing that I'm being part of could be and could become. It encompasses a lot of different forms, and it seems like it doesn't just end in the moment that I'm viewing it. It feels like it can expand, it can grow, it can change. I'm with friends, I'm with the people that I live with. In this timeline, I don't really understand ideas about spectators or visitors, because the space has been opened out there are really no borders and no boundaries to how we're thinking about what we're seeing. So I'm surrounded by people that I know that I love, and I know that there will be space and time to discuss what we're seeing and how it makes us feel and how it's organized, how it organizes our life and how it impacts how we relate to one another. I know there's space for a range of different opinions about the experience of either watching or becoming part of whatever's happening. I know there's time to kind of debrief, and that will maybe have some effect on what comes after. And in this space, I feel unrestricted. I feel like I have the freedom to make decisions. I feel agentic. I feel capable of asking for help, capable of adding my own ideas. I feel pushed and invigorated by others. I don't feel embarrassed or shameful about the things that I might offer or create. I understand them to be part of a wider collaborative project, and that brings me an intense calm. And I'm interacting with the work feels like what it feels like to interact with other people in this kind of space. It feels easy, and it feels like we're all working towards a generative and a capacious vision for what this thing could be. And there's no concept of taste or of value in a hierarchical sense. We know that we're making something, and there will be no kind of third party that will tell us what's right or what's wrong about it or where it fits in a cultural arena. It's completely separated from that. And so the space is open to things happening.
Thank you, Lola. Our second caller is Sif. I'm walking around the space. I'm at the entrance of this exhibition, and it feels like home. I'm thinking about my senses, and as someone that is neurodiverse, this feels very welcome. The lighting is low and comforting. It's soft. It's not noisy. I feel like the signage, the graphic design, there's the wayfinding for the exhibition. So there's zoning on the floor like colours, and I feel like I'm being guided around the exhibition, but there's no like loud arrows or voices of authority. Even in the signage, everything is so paced and gentle, like soft guiding hands throughout the space. The lighting is great in some parts. There's lots of little alcoves where they're showcasing some of the work. The work is beautiful. I see in the work people like myself. I'm not being stared at in this space. I'm one of many. Both when I look around, both as a visitor, I am one of many. Both on the walls, I am one of many. I can visit this exhibition at any point. It's a 24-hour exhibition. We'll limit ourselves to the constraints of time. It's 24 hours. I feel like in another world. I'd always try to choose the quietest times, the times where I can go in and out like a ghost, but in this world, I'm not a ghost. I am allowed to occupy space bravely and loudly. I feel like this space is just as much my space. The work is flavorful. It's like eating with my eyes. I feel full. The work is eclectic, a journey, colourful. Colour is at the heart of everything. And texture and pattern, so much pattern. There's lots of people, but I don't feel alien. There's lots of people, and I feel like, again, I am one of many. I am the majority. I can touch the work. I can stand as close as I like, and no one is guarding. There are no gatekeepers here. There are no doors here. There are no gates here. And there's a cafe, there's always a cafe, and oh my God, there's a gift shop. This is where, this is always my favorite place, the gift shop, where I can take home a memory. I'm not taking home something that is so far removed from the work, that is commercialized and commodified. I'm taking home a memory. I'm taking home the feeling of belonging. I'm taking home the feeling of solidarity. I'm taking home the feeling of feeling seen, both on the walls and in the space. This gallery is my home. My home is a gallery.
So that was one of the first exercises I designed, which was like a really interesting experience because I did work with more than 4 artists initially, but everyone, even the artists that made it to the final 4, found it a very difficult activity to do, even though it's literally their 4-minute pieces, because one, it engages you in imagining, like being very aware of how colonialism has shaped exhibition spaces, the design, who feels like they belong, who doesn't feel like they belong, the choice of artists and everything about them. Then rejecting that and imagining a space without that and how that would look like, feel like, how that was sensed was actually quite difficult for people to do. And it was interesting to see the different worlds that they created, but also when one of the first people I presented this to was like a group of students, then I asked them afterwards, what did the worlds look like in your brains? And they all had very different ideas of what the worlds look like. So it was a very interesting process, but from that I learned that I needed to have a more collaborative approach because it still relied on this sort of colonial notion of the single narrator and the single curator. And in reality, what would be more beneficial is a collaborative process. So one of the things I started to do is work with game designers and game artists and look at the concept of collaborative world building. So one of the artists I worked with was David Blandy, who I met during my time at my old gallery because he did an exhibition there. And recently he asked me to do a game test on a collective world building art-based game, which had themes of post-colonialism. And it made me think, okay, how could I sort of draw from collective world building and intersect that with collective curating and socially engaged curating and topics and themes of decolonization. So that's kind of where I'm at the moment with my research. And so I made a loose design of an activity which I have been engaging with in the last few months. So I am currently working with a group in Brighton called Radical Horizons, which is a QC Park queer trans people of colour sort of collective group that does social gatherings as a curator. I'm actually in the space now, we're installing this weekend. So I'm working with 4 artists and who have like wonderfully offered to engage with me in terms of the exhibition, but also with my experimental curatorial practice. So together we sort of played the sort of the decolonial gate world building activity where we sat down and designed a map of a space and had discussions about how the space would be designed, how accessible it was, and had like an hour of like drawing, coloring together. And after we had that hour, we went into the gallery space. So that picture was the first time we went to the gallery. Then I said to them, okay, that space we created like an hour ago, how do you see it envisioned in this physical space? Then we spent time with the gallery manager and looking around and transferring our ideas, our imaginations into the space. And since then, I've been like working to sort of build that map that we created. And within that, sort of reject white cube conventions, center accessibility, and building a social space as well as a like an art like exhibition like space. And that's kind of where I am at the moment with my research. I'll stop sharing now. Oh, I didn't know how to stop sharing. Oh, yes, the button's there. Hopefully you can see my face now. But yeah, so today I'm in the back of the exhibition space, and we're having the exhibition next week. So it'd be interesting to get feedback from the artists and the audience members about the space, but also the curatorial process. Because overall, what matters to me is like people of all types, of all walks of life feel comfortable in the space, and also that the artists feel like they were able to engage in the exhibition curation, that they're proud of what they've been able to display and they feel correctly interpreted. And yeah, I think that's the most important thing to me as a curator too. And yeah, part of the process is challenging and redefining the concept of the curator from being somebody who you give work to as an artist and they stick up on the wall, then they might invite you to the private view and you don't really talk to again, to somebody who is engaged within like a trusting relationship where you both grow and both create in order to create amazing exhibitions for the public to engage in. So yeah, that is my presentation.
So this seems to me like a super collaborative process, working with the artists, which, like you said, is somewhat unusual for curators, where they're mostly interpreting their own vision and bringing it to the galleries. So could you talk a little bit more about this show you're putting on right now? You said there's 4 artists. Like, how, I guess I'm trying to figure out, like, did you create new structures within the space? How, maybe take an example of one of the artists, like what did they feel they needed to be able to express themselves? And then is it up to them to kind of create it within that space, or are you all working as a team?
Yeah, so the start of the process, it was getting all the artists together and getting to know each other, really, like our backgrounds, what kind of artists we were like, how experienced they were with exhibitions, how they worked with curators before, what their work represented to them. So not only did I know, but they all knew the context of each other's work. So just instill the idea that this exhibition isn't like a group of like, it's a group of individuals, but it's not, it's a collective, collaborative process. So in the sort of game and activity, I call them a collective of art mediators. So together you are art mediators and you've been given your artwork as a collection and you need to curate the space. So they first design the space, then situate where their art would be in that space. And then they engage with conversations with each other. So they say, oh, well, our work is close together. Does that work? Or does your work have like a sound element? Would that impact how this work would go? So it teaches them to be considerate of like how everything is placed in the space and if it's accessible to different types of people. So it's always a collaborative process because throughout the process we're critiquing each other's choices, but in like a loving and caring way, because we all want everybody's work to shine, but also being considerate of the theme, which is the theme is the world is a garden. So it's a garden themed exhibition. So what they decided is that they wanted half the space to look like a greenhouse. So I've been spending today building a fake greenhouse. And the other space is built outside. So we've installed fake turf in the front for people to walk through. And there's lots of greenery, then the quite big pieces of artwork. And one space is a shrine because somebody's made a massive portrait, but also makes little dolls, like black bearded fairies, which are absolutely beautiful and mystical. And she sort of wants them plotted around in bits. And yeah, so everything is very different, but works together because they built the space together. And me as a curator, I sort of weave their ideas together, then help make it happen using my other skills.
Wonderful. And did these artists all know each other before this exhibition?
No.
It's really interesting. So this is the first time they've met each other and have to collaborate with each other. So I'm going to ask, people are putting questions in the chat. And so Donna Jackson asked, do you enjoy having a more collaborative experience than the single curator narrative process that we may all be used to?
Yes, definitely. I had like the best day with them. Like it's sort of I remember how, because I had like a long break between curating before I worked with them, because I was like the pandemic, I was concentrating my studies, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's so nice to talk to people again, but also talking to artists and like seeing their face light up when they talk about their art, and seeing their face light up when they talk to each other and they learn from each other, and we're all learning in this process and we're all growing. And whilst like curator isn't like, it's always kind of seen as an individual ivory tower kind of role, which I kind of hate personally. As like a person, I love like collaborating, but I've always been told, even like by instructors, like that's not what curator does. You need to like own like your vision. It needs to be your vision. About like, I'm like, that doesn't seem like legitimate and correct, especially when you're curating for a social space and like a public art gallery rather than a private art gallery or a private space. Whilst I have many intersectional identities, I don't know what it's like to experience a piece of art from like multicultural perspectives and meanings. So the more people I have in the conversation being like, actually, this looks like this to me, or this, I get this when I see this, or when I smell this, it adds to my knowledge in curating the space. And also makes more people who feel involved go on to be involved in other spaces. And also, it's also an educational process, the way I curate, because I do give people at least a half an hour presentation about decolonial theory and how that's ingrained in curatorial practice. And they come back to me like in a month's time being like, I go to exhibitions and museums now and I have a completely different perspective about exhibitions now and how a space should be designed. Which, yeah, it's a massive benefit if that's a way that education and perspective can grow in the arts.
Very interesting. Now, did you, for this exhibition too, so did you choose these artists or were you kind of given these artists for this exhibition? How did that work out?
So Radical Rhizomes, collectively, there's about, I think, maybe like a couple of hundred members. So I think there was an open call that lasted about like a month.
Okay.
So out of that pool of people, I had to select 4.
Okay, so there was an open call and you selected from that call.
Yeah.
That worked. Okay, great. Marguerite Carlton asks, has your work started or changed conversations and actions with other gallery folk or curators in your area?
Yeah, so a few of the managers of galleries or directors came to some of my workshops, which is great because I feel like I had never met them before. And they definitely engage in the discussions. And I, like I said, like you said before, I work for CVAN, which is Southeast, which is sort of gallery visual arts workers. And I engage with quite a few local and gallerists through those networks and conversations. And I feel like my perspective is kind of a different angle than the work that's currently been done. There has been more of a drive towards diversification and like small talks of decolonization, but the problem is that nobody really knows what that means. and like sort of the mainstream art sector, they know it's a thing, but they understand it in the context of museums rather than the context of contemporary art. So my work might be the first thing they engage in terms of looking at colonial frameworks and structural whiteness within the contemporary art field. So hopefully I'll be engaging in more conversations with them. But I don't know if you had in the UK, there's been more cuts than usual to the arts. So at the moment, I feel like people are focusing on staying open than anything else. But yeah.
Focusing on what? Could you repeat that?
Staying open, just staying, yeah. Yeah.
Donna Jackson asked, what are 3 or 4 things that you consider colonial processes, things that we can see clearly and maybe have an easier time changing?
One huge aspect is generally the concept of the white cube stems from Eurocentric aesthetics and elements of scientific race of science on like how people should, or the ideal way of experiencing art, which just, it's been imported in so many different countries. Like I went to Ghana a few months ago and the National Gallery is a more or less a white cube with some like rooms that are kind of different, but it just shows the sort of how Eurocentric aesthetics have flown into like countries that like really incorporated different kinds of color and architecture in their cultural spaces, and it's been whitewashed to a very narrow way of seeing art, because it's a way of positioning art as valuable, as worthy, and that's a very colonial framework. Also, even the concept of a curator is quite a complex and colonial format. I sort of swerve towards the term art mediator, because I think traditionally the curator still is aligned with this sort of single narrative authoritarian view of like, I have the best taste in the world, and therefore you're just going to see things through my perspective, and that's going to be the right one. And if you don't get it, you're just obviously just not culturally aware enough, which is not the right way to go about things. It's not going to draw people into art and make people engaged in art. It's going to like strengthen this sort of a hierarchy within cultural currency and understanding. Another colonial process is thought interpretation. For like my research and studies, especially around how the standards of like gallery text and interpretation developed in galleries in the UK, a lot of it stemmed from like art schools, which at first only rich white men could go to, which is similar-ish now, and how they thought people should be educated educated in art, and that sort of was mirrored in the first art galleries that were created, and that sort of standard hasn't like diverged much since. And yeah, there's so many ways you can like be told additional information about art or for that to be communicated to you, but this standard that has come through like the colonial times is still ingrained as the correct way to be instructed about what good art is. You need to know the name and the size and like on canvas, and that's all you need to know about this person. Or you're given like a massive essay with like very complex text and big words that tell you absolutely nothing but make you feel maybe less intelligent. So those are, I guess, colonial elements that I feel like can be easily changed. I think all those things, well, in the UK, I guess people are making more, I guess, workshops, toolkits and things that highlight and show examples of ways you can do it differently.
Jamie Lioto, why don't you unmute yourself and ask this question? It's a little more complex. Is Jamie there?
Hi, yes, I am. Sorry, I just I'm on my iPad, so it's a little clunky. So I'm in my practice, I'm working on exploring the aftermath of trauma. So not the trauma or traumatic events themselves, but the lasting psychological impact. And so I was interested in your comments about exploitative practices by institutions and media and whatnot. And I was wondering if there are any contemporary artists on your radar that you could share that are addressing trauma in meaningful ways that work outside of those practices. If there is anyone on your radar, I'm putting you on the spot, of course.
Yes, there's something I saw last year, but I'm so sorry, I can't remember their name. But there was a beautiful exhibition. It was film-based, and it dealt with the trauma of being a migrant. And I will try to get the name for you, like somehow. But it was.
You remember, you can send it to me, and I'll send it to you.
Yeah, I will, because it was very touching. I think it also showed at the Tate afterwards. But yeah, I will. Is that all your question?
Yeah, that was, yeah, just interested what your exposure was. Oh, well, and since I'm here, but I was also wondering in what ways, I mean, I love all of your ideas and research, and in what ways can we support your work? And also, I mean, I feel like you're leading by example, but like, how can we put to practice, these things that you're teaching us right now, like within our own communities, if you have suggestions? And
well, at the moment, I continue to create my videos and encourage people to use it for publications in their own spaces. I know a few lecturers in the UK have used my videos for like seminars and workshops as a precursor to open discussions. And I feel like as time comes on, I will be refining like my process and practice, and any kind of feedback either on like the YouTube videos or like social media is good. But yeah, people have been supporting me through like from my Patreon to like just giving my stuff a share in order to get my my work visible in mostly like academic and training spaces, because I feel that those are like good, but also curatorial teams, especially when people, a lot of conversations I've had is like issues between curatorial teams and like community teams within galleries, and like the community teams being more engaged with these issues, but not being able to communicate that with those curatorial teams. So using my resources, I also share other people's resources on like my social media to have like to strike up those conversations. But yeah, I feel like I probably have 2 more years, so I'm doing it part-time. So there's gonna be a lot to share, and hopefully something really big to share when I finish.
Great. So Donna Jackson asks, have you connected to curators of color in America with these practices? Are you open to this if you haven't? I feel this could be such a shift for American art galleries as well.
Yeah, I have been thinking about that. I think at the moment, my supervisor would be like, finish your PhD. So therefore, I'll be focusing on England at the moment. But I do have family in New York who deserve a visit. And I also have like my grandmother's part of my family, Afro-Brazilian, so I also tend to visit Brazil soon. And yeah, really start to connect and build those spaces, build those relationships and explore some spaces, because yeah, I did a research project last year on the Great Migration and like the story of Black artists that traveled within the Great Migration, and it's like opened my eyes to like all like how similar and different experiences of Black artists and Black curators are in America, and I'd love to have more time to follow up on that.
Great. Well, if you come over to America, Donna says, contact us. I had another question. So this how long, especially like, for example, the show you're working on right now, how much time are you needing to kind of build in working with the artists to design the space, create the space? Because you know, lots of times galleries, the turnover is very quick from one exhibition to the other. This seems like a more time consuming but rewarding process. How long are you taking for this show?
So this show has been put together for 5 months, which has been quite like short in terms of, well, I used to work at galleries, sometimes shows like turnovers like for like a month, so it's longer than what I'm used to. But yeah, it's been tough because I only been contracted to work on show one day a week. All the artists I'm working with aren't full-time artists, they all have part-time jobs. And I've had to make it in like a quite like small budget that ensures that the artists are also paid and everybody's paid and there's no exploitation anywhere. So it has been difficult, but it's shown me it's possible, because I've done it on like a very tiny budget when I know there's other organizations that have had a lot bigger budgets and a lot more time to spend with the artists. But it has made me like be aware of like when I'm working with people to tell them that the way I work is a little bit unique. Like it's not like nobody else does a curation like this, but when you're working in a socially engaged way, other people's time must be paid for, and time is money, and it takes also time to like collectively gather people's thoughts and a lot more time to create something from that, because it was coming from my head, but it probably come out a little bit faster. I'm constantly checking with my artists, are you okay with this? Even like today, the artists that haven't been here, I've been like taking pictures and be like, you're all right, because it is a collective process. The collective process does take more time, more money. But I feel like slow curating is enriching and what the sort of gallery sector needs to go towards, but it's very hard in a capitalist society where people are just constantly pushing out content to like feel like you need to keep up. But I feel like there's different ways you can keep up, and also like collectively, as in working with Brighton, like the gallery, like we're friends. We're never in competition. Like if our gallery shut for like a week and stuff, we'd be like, go to the exhibition down the road. That's great. That's also great. Like we don't need to like always be constantly open in order to like burn out, because it burns us out as an organization. It burns artists out. But ideally, I'd love to have more money to actually host residencies or just bursaries, so the artists didn't have to like do their second jobs on top of creating the artwork. And yeah, because more time to focus is so much better when creating exhibitions.
Wonderful. Does anyone else have any more questions? So you could just pop in. No? All right. Well, this was wonderful. Thank you so much. I think we all learned a lot. Susuana, could you put your, even though we have it on our website, your website, your Instagram,
Yeah.
all of the information in the chat. And yes, a round of applause for Susuana. Our next 2 second Saturdays are going to be hosted or run by Shante Robinson, and it will be on June 10th, writing artist statements, and July 8th, writing artist bios. And in August, we're taking a well-deserved break because everyone needs to go on vacation in August. So there will be more information in the WCA newsletter and emails sent out to everybody with Zoom links in the coming weeks. So thank you so much again for joining us. I'm glad that the time difference, it all worked out. We figured out 5 hours.
Yeah. It's about.
And, thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful Saturday.